And at some point, it's going to be important for the American people to come to grips with it. And for us to be able to shift how we think about the issue of gun violence collectively.
The slaughter of 9 people in a South Carolina church has brought forth the best and the worst of humanity. Those who first think about sympathy for the dead and their families. Those who seek to explain it away as something less than what it is. And to many, that is an obvious moment of seething racial hate. Let's begin there with the final news call of the week. Let's welcome back the New York Times bestselling author and CNBC contributor Carol Roth, along with veteran New York attorney and GOP communications strategist Adam Goodman. I thank you both for joining us on what is a difficult day to talk news here. Adam, I'm going to begin with you. Charles Cotton is the gentleman's name. He's a board member for the National Rifle Association. He blames what happened in South Carolina on State Senator Clementa Pinckney, the pastor who was killed, saying that if he had voted for armed gun owners, if he had voted for it, then 8 of his church members might be alive. Some people would see this as being dead on target. Others would say that it's politicizing. What do you think?
Ill-timed, callous, and inexcusable. I mean, we're getting a lesson now, Ed, on what it looks like when a community, unlike what we saw in Baltimore not so long ago, when a community pulls together with class and character in a time of crisis and distress. And I think the last thing we should be doing is having a political debate where we're trying to choose winners and losers when we've already seen 9 families lose their loved ones in a way they can never fully recover from. So are his comments intemperate and wrong? Absolutely. I think the president did nothing to advance the cause of a sober argument here either when he immediately injected a gun control debate into a time of mourning when the people were looking to the president of the United States to offer some solace and perspective, not politics.
Carol, I'm going to come to you then because I think that's actually a good idea. Let's start to talk about the president here because he came out, offered his sympathies as you would expect a president to do, but then immediately brought gun control into it. And I have talked to so many people in the last 24 hours, gun owners and non-gun owners, who are on both sides of this. But many of them are saying, you didn't really have to do it when the bodies were still being taken out of the church, did you, Mr. President? But others say you've got to do it then because we've not done anything to change this. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the timing is completely wrong. And as you said, it doesn't matter what side of the argument you're on. This isn't the time to have that debate and discussion, which is an ongoing debate and discussion and obviously has a lot of firepower, no pun certainly meant intended by that, on both sides. I think that it's not appropriate when there is such a situation like this to immediately go to what methodology was used behind the attack. And frankly, I think the president needs to take a step back and ask himself, why under his presidency does there seem to be more tension and more hatred and a more divided country than ever before? I think if you want to ask any question as the president, that would be the one to ask.
Well, but and I'll play devil's advocate here with you for a moment, Carol, because there are people who will say that 9 people were gunned down. And they'll say they'll go to Newtown, they'll go back to Columbine, they'll hit Aurora, and they'll say, if we're not going to talk about it now, what are we afraid of? Isn't this the time then? It's an emotional time, yes, but isn't it a time to say, we've got to stop this from happening? And again, devil's advocate.
Here's the question, Ed. Here's the question, Ed. Every weekend in Chicago, more people are gunned down than the 9 people this particular week. So why is that not the time to talk about? This happens every single week in the city that I live in. So if you're going to make that argument, there were plenty of opportunities to have the discussion over and over and over again. So why this time?
And I'll tell you what, Adam, here's Stephen King, the novelist, and everybody knows who Stephen King is. He's tweeting out, until responsible gun owners support responsible gun control laws, innocent blood will continue to flow. How many times must we see this? To Carol's point, though, it happens every weekend in Chicago. It's happening more in New York than ever before. It's happening still in Los Angeles, where there are gun deaths by the dozens that are happening. So why does it take something like this, then, to make the politicians come out of their hole and talk about it, and not every day?
Well, the answer to that, probably we need a psychologist involved in this discussion, is probably a mixture not just of politics, but of a sense of conscience. That, we tend to take issues that bear on racial tensions and racial relations more deeply as a self-reflection of ourselves. But I want to build on what Carol said, and she's absolutely right. Gosh, we're agreeing on a number of things here, Carol. The number of deaths from firearms in 2013 was approximately 30,000 nationally. The number of deaths from automobiles of all kinds was 30,000, but since 2006, over about an 8-year period, the number of deaths that were caused in mass killings, like the ones that, Ed, you referenced with Aurora and Columbine, and now we see, of course, in Charleston, about 950. So it is something that we immediately as human beings gravitate to as something that is emotionally gripping. But the larger story is what Carol is, I think, suggesting. We have to have just as much concern and compassion and speak out just as loudly about the things that happen day to day than the momentary acts of insanity like the one we saw played out in Charleston.
We need to speak about them constantly is what we need to do. Now, I've only got a couple of minutes left, so I want to bring in a side to this. And Carol, to you first. In the Washington Post, the headline, shooters of color are called terrorists and thugs. Why are white shooters called mentally ill? There are those who would say that the writer here has a point. Does she?
No, she does not, because they're conflating different events, and you can't take every event and equate it to every other event. A lot of times when we are seeing these terrorist events, it's because the people themselves are saying that they're related to somebody of a certain ideology, such as the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda or some other terrorist-related group. So it makes sense to call them terrorists. The people of color who are being called thugs, who are involved in gang violence, that's why they're being called thugs. It's not because they're people of color, it's because of the relation of what they're doing. When you have a lone wolf who is not subscribing to ideology or to stealing and robbing in the context, that's why we're calling them mentally ill.
But would you say, though, that, Carol, that
it's not about the people?
While we call them mentally ill, don't we still have to call a guy like this a terrorist? Don't we still have to call him a mass murderer? Don't we still have to call him much more than just mentally ill?
Well,
this guy killed 9 people.
He's certainly a mass murderer. Terrorist, I guess it depends on a very semantic definition of terror. Is there a political ideology behind that?
Seriously, you wouldn't call him a terrorist?
Definition of terrorist.
You wouldn't call him a terrorist?
I would call him a mass murderer, crazy, wacko, scum of the earth. I don't know that in this particular case that he was professing any sort of terror ideology. I haven't read anything to that effect. So from a purely semantic standpoint, probably not.
Okay. To you, Adam, then, on the same question, then, with regard to terrorists, thugs, mentally ill, white and black.
Well, clearly, this individual in South Carolina terrorized an entire community and, by extension, frankly, an entire country. So that much I grant in the Washington Post story. But I think the bigger thing here is the matter of race. And I think what happened here is this individual decided to create or perpetrate a hate crime based on color of skin as opposed to ideology or anything more deeply involved in terrorist movements around the world. Did he terrorize this community? Unquestionably. And I get the point that what that article is really saying, Ed, is the state of race relations in this country has this all on tenterhooks. And the best thing we can do and do immediately is to openly and fully discuss that.
Absolutely.
As a society.
I'm glad you said that, because it's something that we have been trying to do on this show. We're going to continue to do it. Just talk honestly about it. Let's get this stuff out in the open and stop hiding it, please. Adam Goodman, Carol Roth, always a pleasure to have you both on the show. I look forward to the next time we get to speak. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Ed.
All right, take care. Next, the man who puts his money where his mouth is, protecting Syrian refugees. It's coming up right here on MidPoint.